So everybody knows what this is. This is a drill. And most people know that this is used for the most part to either drive screws or fasteners or to drill holes. But what most people don't know or don't realize is, while those are the two main functions of a drill, there are so many features on these that can make your projects go so much smoother, so much faster. And based on my experience with talking with people, I'm willing to bet that most of you will find that there are one or two features that you didn't know anything about or didn't fully understand how they worked and how they're beneficial. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so for this first feature, it's one that for the most part, everybody has very basic knowledge of, because if you don't, your drill's not gonna work, but they don't fully understand what all they're capable of or where they came from. And that first feature comes down to the chuck. So when we're talking about the chuck, we're talking about where we insert our drivers and our drill bits. Obviously, if you don't know how to do this, then you're not gonna be able to run a drill ever. Like, it's just not gonna work at all. So everybody has some common knowledge on this. So these are your modern drills, and this has what's called a keyless chuck. Pretty much all of your modern drills like this are going to have one of these keyless chucks on them. Whereas some drills still, depending on what they are, will have these. But especially older drills, the keyless chuck wasn't a thing. It was a keyed chuck. So we got a chuck here, same things internally where they'll pinch down on a drill bit or a driver. And the thing with these is, while you can insert a drill bit and you can tighten it by hand, once we get to a certain point, we can't turn it any further. If we just keep trying to turn it, we're just gonna keep spinning the entire chuck and it's not actually gonna tighten down anymore. A lot of people might think, oh, it must be in there nice and tight then. But the fact of the matter is, this is not in there tight enough. In order to actually get these tight enough, when these were the drills that were the most common, you would actually need what is called a key, which is this right here. Once you would insert it into that hole, and once it's inserted into there, you would turn the key, whether it be to the right to tighten it or left to loosen it, until you couldn't turn that key anymore. And then that is what would then tighten down the chuck onto the drill bit or driver to where it wouldn't get loose and just fall out. Whereas with your modern drills now, if we just open this chuck up a little bit, insert another drill bit, start to tighten it down, you're gonna hear what is a ratcheting noise. Once you start getting any tension on it, that's when that ratcheting noise will start. So listen closely and you'll hear that now. All right, so that ratcheting is what is actually tightening the chuck down onto the drill bit. As you can see, this does not continue to rotate, and the ratcheting mechanics inside just continue to compress slowly onto whatever it is that you're inserting into it. And another nice thing about this feature is you have all different types of bases for your drill bits, or maybe you are actually using a driver, which a lot of time is going to use some sort of a hex shank. But what's great about having the keyless chucks and that ratcheting action is it will make anything that you insert into this very, very secure, because again, you have those different types of bases. Sometimes they're very smooth like this. If you go into a little bit better drill bit, you'll see down at the base, they actually have it to where it's flattened out on different portions of that base. And that's to allow for that drill or that chuck to really tighten down on these as best as it possibly can, so there is no slippage. So I'd really recommend when you buy drill bits that you look into getting some that actually have that feature. That way you don't have to worry about any of that slippage. And of course, like always, I'll have links for everything you see in this video down in the description down below that you can click on. And if you're watching on TV, I'll have a QR code up on the screen where all you gotta do is scan that QR code, and it will also take you to all of the tools and materials that I'm showing in this video, so you all can check it all out for yourself. All right, so for this next feature that a lot of people, while again, they use it every single time, they might not fully understand what they're capable of doing. And that comes down to the trigger itself. On most of your newer drills, you are gonna have what's called a variable speed trigger. And this is gonna be a very quick section to go over because it does exactly what it sounds like. Depending on how far you pull this trigger, that will depend on how quickly this chuck spins, and therefore spins the drill bit and driver. So on its minimal setting, you can see how slowly it's going, but then if I start pulling it back, it speeds up, and then all the way, it's going a lot faster. Well, a very common mistake is just squeezing the trigger too hard right from the start. So you go to use your drill, and as soon as you want to start drilling or driving, you just go right ahead and pull that trigger on to where it's going full speed or full bore. And again, what is this going to cause? It's going to cause things like slipping or even overdriving the screws. So a good tip is just when you're starting a screw out, a lot of times you're having to hold a screw, and it's just going to go easier to make sure you're getting it started properly. Start out slowly, and then as that thing starts getting driven, that's when you can slowly ramp it up and go as fast as you feel comfortable with. This is such an important feature that a lot of drills just did not used to have years ago. A lot of your drills, you just pull on the trigger and they were going. By having that variable speed, you're able to control whatever it is that you're driving. So in the case of especially like screws, you can go a little bit slower so as to avoid stripping out the heads a little bit easier. You're also able to then dial it in so you're not overdriving that screw. But on the flip side of that, if you're wanting to just drill a hole as quickly as you possibly can, you just want to go all out, it can go a lot faster than as well, and anywhere in between, because it's just going to make everything so much easier. So again, I know this is not a super interesting one, but it is one that a lot of people don't know about just because they might have one of those older drills. So if that is you, now is the time to make sure that you upgrade, because having that variable speed trigger is going to make a massive difference on all of your projects. All right, so next up on our list of unknown or underutilized features, this one comes down to your drill shares something in common with your car, and that is in the fact that these also have gears. And a lot of people don't know that these exist, and if they do know that they exist, what I oftentimes see is people using them incorrectly. All right, so on your common drills, one of the features that a lot of people don't realize exist is most of the time right up here on the very top of the drill. As you can see, it says 2, but if I push this up, you'll see here where it goes to 1. And again, these are the gears of a drill. And just like a car, the lower the number, the higher the torque. The higher the number, typically the higher the speed. So that being said, typically speaking, when I put it into the first gear or the number 1, oftentimes that's when I'm just wanting to get a lot of torque on something. Maybe I'm driving a really long screw and it's going into some very dense wood. Well, in that situation, because it's such a long screw and it's going in the dense wood, you're going to need that extra torque to make sure you're able to drive it in there. The other side of that is, since it is then going slower, again, on 1, slower speed, higher torque. When you do get to those points where that screw is having a really hard time spinning, as long as you have it in number 1 because it's going slower, you have a lot less risk of possibly causing that screw to cam out or to strip out the top of that head. And we all know how frustrating that can be. Whereas if you have it in 2 and it's going a lot faster, you run a much higher risk of causing that to happen, stripping out the top of that screw, and then you're gonna have to start all over with a new screw. So for the most part, that's when I use number 1. When I use number 2, a lot of times I'm using that because I'm wanting to get that extra speed, and maybe I don't need a ton of torque. That's mostly gonna come in a lot of times in your drilling applications. Now, not always the case. There might be times where, again, you're going into some very dense wood, you're using a very long drill bit or some sort of hole saw, and you might need that extra torque. But for the most part, I like to have it on 2 and just slowly work my way into whatever it is that I'm trying to drill a hole in. I also sometimes use the second gear if I'm just driving some light duty screws into some lighter wood, like pine, for instance. So again, it's all kind of situational as to where you use each one of these different gears. All right, so now I'll just demonstrate really quickly for you the difference between the 2 gears, and I'll start out with it in first gear. So I'll go ahead, insert my driver into the chuck. Make sure it's nice and ratcheted down. Now I'll just take a screw, take that drill bit, put it into the top of that screw, and then just drive it into this board real quickly. All right, so as you saw, that went down steadily, but not super fast, and that is with me having the trigger completely depressed. So now let me switch it over to second gear, and you can see what a difference it will make. So I'll take my second screw, put it about an inch or so to the right of where that first screw went in, take my drill, put it on top, and again, I'm gonna pull the trigger to where it's going as fast as it possibly can. All right, so as you saw, much faster. And so that is the biggest difference between having it in first and second gear, and the difference it can make when driving something into wood. And then also, especially if we're planning on drilling a hole. I want to have it in second gear. I want this going as fast as it possibly can go to be stripping away that wood as quickly as possible. And I'll just quickly demonstrate that for you now as well. All right, so we took it down into that wood about 2 inches. That was in second gear. Let's go ahead, flip it over to first gear and see the difference. All right, so getting to that same about 2-inch depth, you can see it took a lot longer, and there's just no advantage to using first gear most of the time when you're trying to drill holes. So again, the gears on a drill are one of the most overlooked features and something that can really be holding you back from making your projects go as quickly and smoothly as possible. You now know that there are different scenarios for each gear setting, so you can see you should have less stripped screws, and then conversely, you should also be able to put in holes a lot faster and drive longer screws into harder wood easier and faster. All right, so we've already gone over some features that are super important, but maybe a little bit more on the basic side. This next part of the video, this is where you're gonna really wanna pay attention, because now we're gonna go over some features that can make some super meaningful differences in your projects, and most of these are ones that are definitely overlooked by most homeowners and DIYers. All right, so now let's talk about what I consider to probably be the most underutilized, most misunderstood, and least known feature on these drills. And that comes down to up here on top around where the chuck is. So we start at the chuck and we come back to here, we will see some numbers that are up here on the top. And almost every drill out there now is going to have this. Well, those numbers mean something, and what those are they are clutch settings. These clutch settings are what are going to help limit the torque to prevent overdriving or possibly stripping out the screws. Right inside of here, it's using a spring and ball bearings that they slip with a clicking sound when it hits whatever limit or setting that you've set this to. And what I mean by limits is you have all these different numbers, and obviously number 1 is going to be your weakest setting. On this particular drill, as far as the clutch goes, 15 is the maximum setting. And some of your drills go up higher, it just depends on the manufacturer. So let me demonstrate this for you really quickly, what a difference this can make. So on my clutch settings, I'm going to go ahead, let's try out the minimum setting. So we've got it here on number 1. So again, this is the least amount of torque. So we're going to take a screw again, and we're going to go ahead and drive it into this board. Now this is pine, so pretty soft wood, shouldn't have much issue driving this screw, but let's see how far it gets on that number 1 or minimum setting. All right, you see there? And as you can also hear, that thing is just making a constant, just clicking, almost a grinding sound if I try to drive this in any further. So you can kind of get the idea of where we're going with this. This is going to allow for us to make sure that we don't over tighten anything, because we all know how easy it is to over tighten and drive a screw too far below the surface. And we're also looking a lot of times for repeatability, just depending on whatever material we're working with. So that was on number 1. So let's bump it up a bit. This drill goes up to 15. Let's go ahead and put it on number 7. That's almost in the middle. 7.5 technically would be, but let's go to 7 and see what it does then when we try to drive a screw in. All right, so as you can see, we got quite a bit further down. This is a 2-inch screw. I would say there's about an inch, maybe a little bit less than an inch still exposed up here on the top between the board and the head. So as you can see, changing it to that number 7 dialed in a little bit more. We're able to drive it a little bit further, but it is just going to refuse to go any further than that. You're just going to continue hearing that grinding noise, which just for illustration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and put this other screw back in. That was on the number 1 setting. All right, so that one was on number 7. We're getting close to where we need it to be. So let's go ahead and let's go up to, I don't know, let's try 10. Let's see if 10 puts us right where we need to be, to where it's getting fairly flush with the top of this board. Okay, we got a lot further, but as you saw and heard, that is as close as we got to then getting that flush with the top of the board, just slightly buried into it. So you're seeing the pattern here, 1, 7, 10. We're getting it dialed in more. Now let's go ahead and let's bump it up to, let's try 13. And it started to pull my boards apart here. But as you can see, we are getting very, very close. It stopped almost with that head perfectly flush with the top of this board. So now what I'm gonna do, that was on 13. Let's move it to 14. This should get us very, very close to almost perfect, or maybe even perfect. So go ahead, same thing, start the screw. And now let's see where it gets us being on the clutch setting of 14. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So it did drive it just slightly more. It is almost completely flush with the top as opposed to when it was on 13, but we aren't quite to where it's just slightly sub-flush with the top of the wood. But now, just for kicks, let's go ahead and set it to the 15 setting and see where that gets us. So I'll go ahead and go full out. Okay, and in this case, on the 15th setting, it overdrove that screw by way too much. So that's actually pretty interesting to me that there was such a variable and minute difference when we went from 13 to 14. We were getting so close to it being just absolutely perfect. And then going from the 14 to the 15, at least on this DeWalt drill, it went from almost completely perfect. I mean, 14 is very, very close, to then driving it down into the wood. I would say that it overdrove it down into the wood by maybe a little less than 1/4 of an inch. Somewhere in that area. It wasn't a full 1/4 inch, but getting close. So in this case, when using a drill in this particular situation, I would want it on that 14th setting. I mean, I got it super, super close. It's almost completely and perfectly flush with the top of the wood. 13 got us very close. 10, not so much. 7, definitely not. And then number 1 barely drove that 2-inch screw in, maybe 1/4 of an inch before it couldn't drive it anymore. So anyways, that is the purpose of clutch settings. You can see the very clear benefits of having them and utilizing them on your future projects. If you were driving a much smaller screw than I was driving, some of that hardware screws, cabinet screws, things of that nature, especially those lower settings, those are really gonna come into play because that wood is always super, super soft and those screws are not long, so they're not creating a whole lot of torque, and you definitely want that repeatability. So the torque settings are a super important feature that everybody should know about to make your projects go not only faster, but a lot easier and look as good as they possibly can. All right, so now we're going to talk about some modes that are on the drill that can take all the things that we've already talked about and either disable them or make them even more efficient. A lot of people don't understand where they should be used at, what the symbolism actually means on these drills, and then what those different symbols or settings have to offer. All right, so a lot of the settings that are on a drill, again, I think these go unnoticed very often. There are a few of them. We'll go in depth on each one of them really quickly here. And we're gonna start out with one that actually is not listed on most of your basic drills. Now, a lot of your more modern drills like this one here, now this one is made by Porter Cable, and the DeWalt has the same functions as what I'm about to show you, but this one shows it to you a little bit better. And that's if we look in here at the top, we start at the chuck, we get back here to the clutch, but if we go back a little bit further, you'll see we have a couple of settings right here. One that looks like a screw and one that looks more like a bit. Well, there's one that's missing on this that is on a lot of your modern drills now, your handheld cordless drills. I just, for myself, do not have one that offers all 3 functions in one drill, but a lot of them will have this function, and that comes in with this drill right here. Now, this one has been used like crazy, and this one, really you buy this for one specific purpose, and that comes into right in here on top. If you see these 2 settings, again, there's that little drill bit looking symbol, but over here to the right, it actually looks like a hammer. And when we set it over over to that setting. What this is for is a lot of times in like masonry work. If you're trying to drill a hole into concrete or brick, things of that nature, you're gonna wanna have it over here on this hammer setting. So when you set it over to the hammer setting, what's gonna end up happening is inside of your drill, usually towards the rear portion of the drill itself, as you pull that trigger, and this is a perfect example of not having variable speed. This is just on or off. It does not have a variable speed trigger. But when you pull that trigger, not only is it spinning the chuck to start that drill bit, but inside, as you are pushing down and trying to drill that hole into that concrete or brick or whatever it is, there is also a gear that is going in and out of and slipping out of another one. And what that's doing is, while it's being slipped out this way and then it falls back in, what that's doing is it's creating like a hammer action. So essentially the effect that it's having is taking a drill, and then as you're having that chuck spin and that drill bit go, a hammer is like tapping the back of it, giving that little extra force into whatever it is that you're trying to drill into. And that is just super important when you're drilling into something that is a very hard surface, because that little tapping action, that little hammering action that's happening is actually helping to drive that bit into that surface and go deeper and deeper and deeper. So if you have any masonry projects, concrete, brickwork, blocks, whatever it is, I would really recommend making sure that you have either a hammer drill like this one or have a standard drill that has the hammer function on it, because it really is going to make that project go so much easier. If you don't have that hammer function, it can be quite difficult to drill into some of those surfaces that are so compact and so hard. All right, so now that we've talked about the hammer function, let's go back to the top of this drill and talk about what these two symbols mean here. So as you can see, I can switch between these two here on top. Again, if you had your hammer, you could switch it over there. But if we start over here with this one right here, that looks like a drill bit. Well, if we flip it over here to this function right here, it looks like a screw. And that's exactly what this is for. When you have drills that have these separate functions on top, you need to make sure that it's in drive mode in order for the clutch to work properly. So for instance, let's go ahead and set this to the #1 setting, because it's going to make it as easy as possible on my hand. I'm just going to hold the chuck and I'm going to create that resistance, so when I pull the trigger, you can see it's not spinning, it's making that grinding noise because we have it set so low, and it's just not gonna spin anymore. By having it in that mode where that screw's at, it's enabling these different clutch settings to do the job that they're designed for. So again, driving a screw, have it on the screw mode there. That goes into then the next thing, because it's important to then understand what this mode over here is, or this setting is, where it looks like a drill bit. So I'm gonna go ahead, set the clutch setting back to 1. So we're back on 1 here. Now that I've got it set to drill mode, it's no longer on drive mode, it's on that drill bit, so it's in drill mode. If I go and I pull that trigger, even though it's in the #1 setting, I go to pull that trigger, I can't hold it. And that actually hurt a little bit, but that is what is the main difference between having it in drill mode and having it in drive mode. If you're wanting to utilize that clutch, which I strongly encourage you to do so on your projects, because we demonstrated how much easier it can make a lot of those projects on you, make sure it's in the proper setting. If you just have it in that drill mode, I don't care what setting you set that clutch to, it's disengaging that clutch from being able to do the job that it's supposed to. It's set to just go full bore and drill that hole into whatever wood that you're trying to drill into. Now I'm demonstrating on this Porter cable just because these are so much more obvious. Most of your drills, and most of my drills, because I like to buy DeWalt, but a lot of your other drills that are out there, they might have the settings like I just showed you. On this DeWalt, you'll see we've got our clutch settings. So here's 1, and then all the way to 15. Okay, so by just adjusting the clutch, that's telling the drill it's in drive mode. It's not in drill mode. In order to put it in drill mode, you have to go past the 15 or the max setting all the way almost back to the 1, to where now it's back to where it looks like a drill bit. And so now it's in drill mode. So for me personally, that's one thing I do like about the DeWalt's is you don't need to worry about remembering. If it's on one of the clutch settings, it's in drive mode. If you want it in drill mode, you got to put it in drill mode. You don't have to worry about forgetting, trying to just drive something, but you got it in drill mode and it cancels those clutch settings out. So those are 3 settings that can be extremely helpful on a project. Knowing what those differences are, using them in the proper situations. By knowing all of this now, it really does open up the doors and the possibilities of what these drills can do, and more so how efficiently they can do them. As always, for your convenience, I will have links to everything you saw in this video, from the different drills to the different drill bits I recommend to the different drivers. I'll also have some links for some drills that do have all those functions, including the hammer function, but I will have links for everything you need when it comes to drills down in the description down below, and up on the screen you will see a QR code. If you're watching on your television, all you gotta do is scan that QR code and it will also take you to everything so you can check out all of this for yourself. Now, just really quickly, if you found that there were some things that you did not know about that you were made aware of in this video, then there's a very good chance that there's some other things out there, because there are just so many things to cover when it comes to tools and materials and things of that nature. So I've got some other videos that go over a lot of these other common things. I will post those videos on the screen now, and whichever one of those interests you the most, all you have to do is click on it and it will take you directly to it. But I hope that you found value in this video, and if you did, if you could do me a huge favor, hit that thumbs up button right down below. And of course, if you have any questions or comments still, you can leave those down in the comment section. And I'll catch you all in one of the next videos.